They cheat.
Rudy's Revelation.
You can't handle the truth. They cheat.
This is all a conspiracy. Don't you know that it's a conspiracy?
Hey everyone, welcome. It is Wednesday, June 26th. I think I said yesterday was the 26th. Actually, today is the 26th. It is Wednesday. Coming up in the headlines, I got some news about Julian Assange and CIA contractors still involved in Operation Mockingbird. Yesterday, Perry and I did have a lengthy discussion. So check out episode 80 of Tuesdays with Perry, up last night. Also, I did get a strike on my YouTube channel, and it stopped ingesting my audio podcast. I had set that up. And not surprising, I was talking about the Kansas lawsuit against Pfizer, and YouTube gave me, excuse me, YouTube gave me a strike for that. And then it stopped ingesting the audio podcast, so you won't be able to find it on YouTube. That's why I'm live on Rumble every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m., so join me then. All right, before I go any further, let's get into the headlines today, Wednesday, June 26th. All right, first up, we have this breaking story from the New York Post. Spies who lie, leader, co-signers were CIA contractors when they falsely implied Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian fake. Most of us know this from the very beginning that that the laptop, just because of the emails that were in there, the corroboration by Tony Bobulinski about the pay-for-play scheme, the selling influence, but particularly also all the photographs there of Hunter Biden engaged in his crack smoking and use of prostitutes and what have you. That none of that was surprising, so it almost authenticated itself just by the content. Plus, we had the store owner of the Mac repair store come out and said it was authentic too. So we had corroboration of the laptop, but then we had these 26 or 30 former intelligence officials that said it was a Russian fake. It wasn't a Russian fake. We knew it was a Russian fake by the content and the corroboration itself. But I'm going to get back into the story here from the New York Post. And the lead goes on to say some of the 51 spies who lie were active CIA contractors when they claimed files from the first son, Hunter Biden's laptop, had the classic earmarks of Russian disinformation ahead of the 2020 election interference. A fact that was uneasily noted inside the agency records acquired by the Post show. Going on. From the article from the New York Post, former CIA acting director Mike Morrell, Satanist, who previously told Congress he organized an October 19, 2020 letter to give to former Vice President Joe Biden a talking point ahead of debate against President Donald Trump, was under contract with the CIA at the time, the agency told Congress. Ex-agency inspector David Buckley was also a contractor at the time. And if you remember the debate, you might not have remembered the debate, is that Trump said, you're the big man. He actually got the phraseology wrong. It was the big guy. But Trump said verbatim, you're the big man, I think. You might not be, but I think you are. And he went on to talk about what the laptop basically generated, which Joe Biden was in a pay-for-play scheme, selling an influence using his son Hunter as the point man to go around and conduct business with foreign companies who were basically greasing Washington, particularly Joe Biden, with millions of dollars. And at some point, particularly with the Chinese, had reached $1 billion. The story goes on to say a congressional source provided the Post with the CIA's document outing Morell as a contractor after his denial, where he basically said that he, I'm not working for the CIA. Once in the agency, always in the agency. It's like Brennan or James Clapper, any of these people, they still have intel security clearance. Why would they have that if they were not conducting work for the government? Of course not. It's just like Fauci is still receiving protection from the United States government, even though he doesn't work for the government anymore. I'm getting some streaming issues here, so I don't know. I used all the tricks. I had technical problems the other day. I'm running on a hair length of RAM here to get the stream to go. The bit rate's set very low, and there's something using up space. I wasn't able to figure out what it was, but it's hard to keep the stream going. And I'm going to take this opportunity now to ask people, please engage the channel. If you don't mind, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the podcast, share the podcast, leave a comment, do what you can to engage the channel. That helps me out tremendously. Trying to get this thing rolling. Rumble's doing their part, and I appreciate that. Obviously, if you go to look for me on YouTube, you're not going to see any of the episodes because what I talk about isn't allowed. So free speech, particularly things around the COVID vaccination, first of all, and you have states now following Kansas suing Pfizer for what was happening with the COVID rollout and what Pfizer was saying about their vaccination, that it was safe and effective, and it really was neither. Matter of fact, this vaccination has caused more damage than all other vaccinations combined. So that is something worth noting. So I'm going to move on to the other news, the big headline that we all should be talking about. First of all, Julian Assange is free, which is the most important thing. He is out of jail or out of detention. Even when he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, he was still detained. He couldn't move freely, couldn't go outside. And so finally, he's in the freedom of fresh air and reunited with his family. Thank God for that. But as I say, is that he is in a lot of danger. Australia is part of the Club of Berne, which is the organization of intelligence agencies, very similar to the Five Eyes. The Western intelligence agencies all share information as the Five Eyes do. And if you don't know what the Five Eyes, it's the NSO, it's the reconnaissance, the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, that teams up with other satellites from other countries that do surveillance. That's the Five Eyes, including the NSA and the sister or brother agencies in other countries. Let's get to the headline, though, from the Associated Press. WikiLeaks Assange pleads guilty to publishing U.S. military secrets in a deal that secures his freedom. We'll go right into the article. This is the lead. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange pleaded guilty to obtaining and publishing U.S. military secrets Wednesday in a deal with the Justice Department and prosecutors that secures his liberty. Well, we'll get into that. And concludes a drawn-out legal saga that raised divisive questions about press freedom and national security. The criminal case of international intrigue, which has played out for years in major world stages of Washington and London, came to a surprise end It was indeed a surprise end, and we're going to get into that, why it's so surprising. In a most unusual setting with Assange, 52, entered his plea in a U.S. District Court in Saipan, the capital of the Northern Mariana Islands. The American Commonwealth in the Pacific is relatively close to Assange's native Australia and accommodated his desire to avoid entering the continental U.S. The deal permitted him to return to Australia without any time in American prison. So he was freed with time served. The 5 years prison in Balmore is actually, I believe, in Scotland, in the UK. But the way the Associated Press, which is compromised news outlet, it says permitted. So when they say permitted, that's not true. It was a condition. So his conditional release was that he would return to his home country, Australia, which he probably wanted to do to be reunited with his family. However, most pundits, and I agree, and I'm not a Russian asset or anything, that he should, like Snowden, should have returned to Russia, to Russia and not Australia, and his family could have visited him there. For the simple reason, why did Snowden go to Russia? The simple reason is to avoid assassination, because he is still considered a security risk by the West, and particularly by the U.S. Now, Joe Biden and the Joe Biden administration is an establishment administration. They're not lefty liberals or whatever. Joe Biden is establishment hack, and he is fronting for the establishment. You know, does he try to placate some people on the left? Sure, but, you know, he's not very far left, certainly. Is more like a neocon, I would have to say. Going back to this article briefly, this is during the trial. At another point, when the judge asked him whether he was satisfied with the plea conditions, Assange responded, "It might depend on the outcome," sparking some laughter in the courtroom. "So far, so good," the judge responded. Well, he wasn't free. He was still in court, so I don't know what that meant. But even Julian Assange seems to be aware of the threat he faces, because as soon as he touches down in Australia, because the U.S., first of all, the CIA's famous assassination scenario is taking down an airplane. I doubt they're going to do it. Usually what they do when they take out high-profile targets is they wait about a year, and then you're hit with a heart attack dart, and then you die of a heart attack. And the narrative will go, oh, well, he spent so much stress and while confined, he had so much stress while confined over the years that it wore on his health, and he was frail, and he just couldn't take it. That's the likely scenario. It's the same thing they did with Tim Russert when Tim Russert outed George W. Bush and, George W. Bush and I think it was John Kerry as Skull and Bones members, that they didn't kill him right away. It was a year, I think a year and 6 months, a year and 8 months, something like that, and he died of a heart attack. But I used to watch Meet the Press when it was with Tim Russert. I didn't mind him so much. He wasn't a blatant leftist hack like the guy that's a news director there now. But in any case, when I saw those interviews where he interviewed the two presidential candidates and asked them that they're both Skull and Bone members and the conspiracy theorists are going to have a lot to say about that, what do you say? And George Bush says it's so secret I can't say. I knew at that point that you bring that up on national television, particularly by one of the major networks, you're either going to get fired or you are going to end up dead, and which was exactly the case. I think my mic is about to fry, so if that happens, just bear with me. Let's move over to more news about Assange. This is from the Telegraph. Biden administration cut a deal with Assange ahead of potential labor takeover. Now, the Telegraph paints it as the Biden administration threw in the towel over its fight with Julian Assange because it didn't believe the Labor government would extradite him. That's talking about the Labor government in the UK. Another key factor, the story says, in resolving the case was the support for a plea bargain deal from Carolyn Kennedy, the influential U.S. ambassador to Australia. Perhaps, I doubt it. And the U.S. authorities sense that even if Assange lost his appeal, the Labor government would block his extradition. Might very well be. Now, back to the debate, which is on everybody's minds and tongues as of late. And the reason being, and we're going to talk about this at length, is the media is continued to bang the drums of Trump is crazy. All these crazy conspiracy theories don't exist. That's not true. The conspiracy theories are more like conspiracy facts. It's the same thing with the 2020 election deniers, that Google now or YouTube allows election denialism. And I thought they would give up eventually on the COVID thing when more of the facts started coming out. And as I often trumpet, I knew in 2021, that's why I didn't take the vaccination, that they were risks and that it wasn't really effective. So, but apparently people at Google don't read the news or don't care about actual facts. They, misinformation just means you're going against the narrative. So, next story up here is from the New York Times. Bringing up drugs, ? Undermining the debate, ? These are old Trump tactics. Ahead of a high-stakes debate, former President Donald Trump is trying to reset the low expectations he set for President Biden. And I'll just get into the story here. If you spend time on Donald Trump's former President Donald Trump, corner of social media is to witness a number of contradictory, unproven, or outright conspiratorial ideas blooming all at once. The approaching presidential debate has apparently sent him into overdrive. And it's just the way they characterize this, first of all, is contradictory, unproven, outright conspiratorial ideas. It's just, like I said, it's always wordplay. They mischaracterize or try to characterize everything as crazy when we know how things operate. It's always, like Alex Jones has always said, he knows how the world works. It's not a conspiracy. What they do is they do commit outlandish acts that are so outlandish that people would never believe that was taking place. And then they could use their famous tactic, which always follows up the lie, which is plausible deniability. That's so outlandish, that could never happen. We never did. That claims falsely, even though they don't prove something's false, they just say a claim is false. So I'll get to the conspiratorial ideas now. On social media and rallies, Mr. Trump has suggested that President Biden is taking performance-enhancing drugs. Let's stop right there. Does anyone doubt that Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, whatever you want to call him, this old and quite decrepit at this point, individual who is a public figure, isn't taking performance-enhancing drugs? I speculate it's Adderall, because what you get with Adderall, when Adderall is used quite often, one of the side effects is agitation, which you see in Joe Biden. It's the same thing with the 2020 election. It's not a false claim. If you look at everything in context, even if you look at now the election and how they have the numbers, it's a dead heat. It's not a dead heat. You look at a Biden rally and they have to close off half the venue to make it look crowded. And then you go to a Trump rally and it's always overflow capacity. What does that tell you? And those are only fractions of people that support Trump. And that's the reality. Okay, not everybody who supports Trump is going to go through and wait in line and do all these things to go to a Trump rally. It's only the diehard fans. So there are people within the electorate that plan on voting for Trump that have never been to a Trump rally, and a lot of them haven't even watched Trump rallies, let alone go to one, because it takes a lot of effort. But the Stop the Steal got about 1 million people. That's a lot of people. Why? Because people didn't believe that Joe Biden won, because he didn't have the support. Regardless of what polls said, you go to any Joe Biden's, you draw circles. Okay, everybody who likes Joe Biden going to this circle, everybody who likes Trump going to that circle, and Trump's circle would be overflowing, and Biden's circle would have like 5 people in it. That's the reality. In any case, going back to the story, Mr. Trump has suggested Biden is taking performance-enhancing drugs ahead of the debate. Then, well, he's not taking performance-enhancing drugs ahead of the debate. Then on Monday, he called Mr. Biden to take a drug test. Mr. Trump banged out the demand on social media, drug test for crooked Joe Biden. I would also immediately agree to one, because Trump really doesn't need performance-enhancing drugs. The story goes on to say, the Trump campaign has also attacked the debate moderators, two veteran CNN journalists, by accusing them of biased coverage of Trump in the past. Now, this is the New York Times. Now, New York Times, what you need to do in journalism is to do your research. So as Levitt, whatever her first name is, this girl Levitt, who was on CNN as part of the Trump campaign, pointed out, just Google Jake Tapper or Dana Bash, what they said about Trump. CNN's coverage was always negative and disparaging about Trump, and so were these anchors. So it's no accusing them of biased coverage of Trump. If New York Times knew anything, they would say of sometimes seemingly biased coverage of Mr. Trump. They said it's an accusation, and the CNN moderator who had Levitt on, the anchor who had Levitt on, she said, you're attacking my colleagues. It's not an attack. It's just stating a fact. Stating a fact is not an attack. Okay? If someone is obese and you call them fat, it's not really an attack. It's just stating the obvious. So the fact is that these moderators are biased, and it's going to be an uneven, an unfair debate. And we know that. And so the article goes on to say, and this is strange, it says in all of those cases where it says that, Trump didn't believe the election or whatever, accused people of taking performance-enhancing drugs, in all those cases, Mr. Trump also falsely claimed that the election itself was rigged. So he's saying, the writer of this article is saying, that in all those cases where the accusations were of taking performance-enhancing drugs, both for Hillary Clinton and Biden in 2020 debates, Mr. Trump also falsely claimed that the election itself was rigged, which it was, because the outcome was known. And we knew at 3 in the morning that they keep counting ballots till 3 in the morning that something is going to happen. And of course it did. We all saw it. But he says falsely claimed, you can't prove that it's a false claim unless you go in and not recount. But the point is you have to count signature verifications, because you have to determine, not just recount fake ballots, but you have to determine whether those ballots themselves are legitimate, specifically because of the mail-in ballot program, which has never been instituted before COVID, because it's an avenue for fraud. And then they just leave it in. The pandemic's over. Why are there still mail-in ballots? And all in blue states, mind you. So then the story goes on to say, Donald Trump is so scared of being held accountable for his toxic agenda and attacking of attacking reproductive freedom and cutting Social Security that he and his allies are resorting to desperate, obviously false lies, said a spokeswoman for Biden campaign. It's not obviously false lies. Like, you have to play these games where you have to have a quantifiers. They're obviously false lies. They're not just false lies. They're obviously false lies. None of this is true. They're not false lies. They're actually probably accurate, knowing how the conspiracy works. And Trump is a moderate. He's not forwarding cutting Social Security. And he's not attacking reproductive freedom. Actually, Trump was the one who said the Republicans need to take more of a moderate approach to abortion if they want to win, because the majority of the electorate think abortion should be legal even if they don't think that it's moral to get one, because you can't legislate morality. All right, next article, The Washington Post. Trump's allies test a new strategy for blocking election results. I'm not going to go too much into this. This is about a person that is Fulton County in Georgia who swore an oath to prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse. That's in her oath. Duties, she says, are not possible without examining the records that she has demanded. And this is talking about signature verification and voter rolls. And she denied that Biden won the 2020 election. Yes, that's true. We are playing poker with the cards up. They're telling us exactly what they're going to do. We would be foolish if we sat on our hands and did nothing to watch this happen. Trump has stated plainly that the only way he can lose this fall is the Democrats cheat.
They cheat.
His campaign and the Republican National Committee are spending historic sums building election integrity operations, and they put election integrity in quotes. Election integrity. Operations in key battleground states preparing to challenge results in court and recruiting large armies of grassroots supporters to monitor voting locations and count facilities and service poll workers. What they couldn't do during the pandemic. And they should have been wise, because basically what it was in 2016 was poll monitors doing exit polls and so forth and so on, counting people that were likely Republican or Trump voters. And what Trump did, and a lot of us alluded to, is when you go to the poll, wear a red shirt. So exit pollers know, without even stopping to talk to you, how many people were voting for Trump and how many people were voting for Hillary. And that was largely successful, because if you're out there filming it, you know, the cops might try to stop you, but you can film people exiting the polls. And then the story goes on to say here, certification of local results is a key target in this effort, a once mundane administrative step that has become a flashpoint in the debate over election security and potential opportunity to subvert the will of voters. Election officials in the nation's 3,000 plus counties must sign off on the result, and then they go through what the procedure is. Barring such challenges, certification allows the winning candidate electors to then gather in each state capital and cast their electoral college votes. Delaying certification at any step could hold up or halt the process, potentially preventing the rightful winner from taking office. That's the idea and that was the idea on January 6th, and the idiots who went into the Capitol blew it. And they were egged on and goaded on by, the U.S. secret police, what have you, intelligence officials and agents and assets. But there are two things they say here is delaying certification so we can look at the vote, because what they want to do is they wanted to push it through. And as soon as they pushed it through, then they rung the Capitol with razor wire, just like coup plotters always do. When they assume power, they're afraid they're going to be ripped away from their desks in a counter coup or in an insurrection. And that's why they put razor wire around. But most of us knew that when the idiots went into the Capitol, which is trespassing, which is breaking the law, that we were duped. And now everybody doesn't want to go to any sort of rally near government buildings or anything, because they don't want to be drawn into that again. But typically the certifications where there are no errors, it simply reflects the votes tallied at that point and does not preclude lawsuits contesting those results. In some states, lawsuits cannot be filed until after certification is complete. It doesn't matter because the point is that the envelopes that were thrown away, that had the signatures on them, the vote tally couldn't be rightfully examined, and particularly the validity of the ballots themselves, these mail-in ballots. And they said the effort by these Republicans is a potential opportunity to subvert the will of the voters. Not true. That's not what they're trying to do. We're not trying to subvert the will of the voters. We're trying to preserve the will of the voters. And the majority, 53% of the electorate supports Donald Trump, which is the majority. Plus, those are diehard. Plus any additional from traditional black constituencies, Democratic constituencies, the black vote, Hispanic vote, poor vote, women vote, young vote. All these things are added on top of the diehard support of 53%. So Trump is really at 56, some say 58, which is more than enough to win. So the Democrats have to play all these friggin' tricks to win because that's what they do. They cheat. And if you know that any supermajority Democratic states, like the ones I live in, they block every attempt at a Republican resurgence by dirty tricks and playing games with the elections. And that's why they that's why they're called Democrats, because it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes or what votes are counted. Ballots, truck full of ballots that were filled out by a machine. All right, next story up here, kind of running on time here. These things have been getting kind of long. Nobody really seems to mind, which is great. But here on this podcast, I cover the most headlines compared to any other podcast and news outlet. Usually a news outlet will pick 4 or 5 stories they talk for an hour or 2 hours about. I try to cover the most headlines and give brief insight, and so we can move on. All right, moving on to Semaphore. Top reporters leave Politico. High-profile departures come amid a year-long transformation of Politico's newsroom by a new leadership group, which has attempted to refocus the company's editorial offerings, blah, blah, blah. Let me just go to the last line here. Part of this has meant an editorial overhaul, which nearly all news stories are read by top editors to ensure consistency with Politico's new brand. Burns himself has often rewritten individual stories filed by reporters. I worked in news. This is called editorializing, or the CIA Mockingbird assets in the newsroom take control of the story's narrative. So if you're a reporter, you'll go out to the scene, you'll document what you see, and you'll bolster that by interviewing people that are there, because you could use your own eyewitness account, but that's not how you do journalism. You ask people, what did you see? What's happening here? What is this? Talk to organizers of any event and talk to detractors and, try to balance it out. But balance it out, and I always say this, if there are 10 people that say one thing and then one person says another, you don't conclude those weighted together equally, because the majority of people say X, and so that's the majority opinion. You got to go with that. You can include a detractor or dissenting opinion, but you have to also state that only one person at the event thought it sucked and everybody thought it was great. That's fine. But what newsrooms do, in the newsroom that I work for, especially with these big major corporations, is and this is what I got to before, it's the CIA is operating the media in the United States, the mainstream media. So Politico, The Hill, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, definitely the places like the Washington Post, Newsweek and others. I mean, it goes on and on. The only way you can find accurate news is going to alternative news media and someone who can distill the headlines like I do in a professional manner, getting the conclusions from reading between the lines. You know, of course it's speculative, but the point is, if you know the way the world works, people lie all the fucking time. They use plausible deniability, and they use this wordplay to mischaracterize the truth by putting in words like false claims and, you know, obviously false, you know, obvious lies, when they don't go ahead and prove anything. Like, they might characterize you in a certain manner, but they don't show any evidence to support that characterization. Anyway, let's go on with the headlines here. New York Post, DHS identifies 400 migrants smuggled into the U.S. by ISIS-affiliated network. I don't even think this doesn't really need any further articulation. First of all, ISIS is run by the CIA, particularly the left, the liberal, the socialists in the CIA, the communists, and all these people that know in the intelligence agencies that communism and socialism is an ideology that was foisted upon civilizations, populations, etc., societies, and it was made up. It's a made-up thing that feigns equity or equality or what have you, but is really a way to debase and undermine political people's economic opportunity and ability to get in the higher rungs of society to challenge the old guard, so to speak, and those people. So if you read it this way, the CIA is smuggling in terrorists at the southern border with the plausible deniability of their cover organizations, ISIS, which isn't really run by Wahhabis anymore, because the new prince in Saudi Arabia that Trump helped get into power put an end to Islamic fanaticism being exported out of Saudi Arabia. All right, next headline here is from the Daily Express U.S. Bird flu. Finland becomes first country in the world to start vaccinations for humans. Finland plans to offer preemptive bird flu vaccines as soon as next week to some workers with exposure to animals, et cetera, et cetera. Finland has become the first country to do it. The Nordic country plans preemptive vaccine. Again, it's an mRNA. You get 2 injections. It's for 10,000 people. Finland has bought more than 10,000 vaccines, each consisting of 2 injections. As part of a joint EU procurement, of course, it's the supranational organization of the EU. A joint EU procurement of 40 million doses for 15 nations. 40 million. Now, they're only administering 10,000 now, but 40 million, and that's the takeaway. What are they expecting 40 million? Why would you need 40 million doses? And so the Australian manufacturer CSL Seqirus, you should look into what that means, who created the doses, said to Reuters that Finland will be the first country to roll out the vaccine. And of course, everything will be fine. There'll be no injuries, whatever. It's probably a placebo. And then, as I suspect, closer to the election, if the Democrats are losing and Trump looks to take power once again, because they can see he's got overwhelming support in the electorate, they're going to pull a fast one. Either with bird flu or, according to the Washington Post, CDC warns of increased dengue fever risk in the U.S. But what do they actually say? There is no evidence of a dengue outbreak in the continental United States. However, around the world, dengue cases have risen at an alarming rate, including in Puerto Rico, which is experiencing an increasing number of dengue cases, the CDC said in a statement. Well, Puerto Rico is jungle. It's tropical. Tropical jungle, that's where you get dengue fever. Dengue fever. But CDC warns of increased dengue fever risks in the U.S. Well, you mean Puerto Rico. They just said Puerto Rico, but they're trying to scare everybody. And again, it's putting something on a shelf to be able to take it off in right before the election and to create an outbreak or fake an outbreak. create or fake, it doesn't really matter. Plausible deniability, we didn't do anything. And all this dengue fever and all these other things, malaria and stuff, all of a sudden appearing in the U.S., particularly in Florida, after Bill Gates releases GMO mosquitoes. And you could research that if you want to find out what he was really doing. And then it's just like when they, you know, I don't have to worry about this going on to YouTube now, because I was trying to curtail my how I express talking about COVID. But actually, there was an increase in COVID cases after they started administering the shot, or actually a couple months after, because what happened with antibody-dependent enhancement is at first your antibodies build to fight off the virus, but then they wane and your antibodies become lower than they were originally. So you're more susceptible to the disease. More national news before we get international here. I just wanted to point out this article, Business Insider, Google studied Gen Z. What did they found was alarming. What did they find? Where older generations are out there struggling to fact check information and cite sources, that's journalism. Gen Zers don't even bother. They just read the headlines and then speed scroll to the comments to see what everyone else says. They're outsourcing the determination of truth and importance to like-minded, trusted influencers. And if the article's too long, they just skip it. They don't read it. Well, that's okay, because you don't need, in journalism, you don't need to read a long article. It's an inverted pyramid. So all the important information should be in the lead up top. It's only if you want more information that you keep reading. Anyway, going on with the story, they don't want to see stuff that might force them to think too hard or that upsets them emotionally if they have a goal jigsaw found. It is to learn what they need to know to remain cool and conversant in their chosen social groups, which means they can talk about it. And then it goes on to say the old guard is like, yeah, but you have to care ultimately about the truth, not the postmodernists. The Gen Z take is, you can tell me about your truth and what you think is important. What establishes the relevance of a claim isn't some established notion of authority. It's social signals that they get from their peers, which is exactly the opposite of what the truth is. A truth is established through facts, which is established through corroborating sources. That's journalism. They don't care about journalism. That's why real journalism is waning and the propaganda narrative is winning, particularly among Gen Zers, because all they have to do, the CIA has to populate comments that say, hey, that Trump person is a liar, or whatever. You know, that people saying vaccines have inherent risks, they're crazy. And some of it's picked up, but that's not to understand establishing facts through journalism is through sourcing things and then corroborating sources. So you just one source stories are not authoritative. You need multiple sources that can corroborate the same thing. The sky is blue. You know, all these people look out and say it is. That's how you do journalism. Now, these days, a lot of times they balance the facts with like their narrative and the overarching narrative that is truthful, like Trump is popular, with their narrative that a lot of people in America hate Trump. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There are more people that like Trump than hate Trump, but the way they make it sound is that there's an equal amount. There's going to be a civil war because a lot of people don't like Trump and a lot of people like Trump. That's not the case. More people like Trump than dislike Trump, but the people that don't like Trump get more news coverage. Next story up, moving to international news, Sarah Netanyahu accuses IDF chiefs of coup against her husband, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, while meeting hostage families. Following the controversial statements, Netanyahu clarified her remarks were aimed not at the IDF, but rather at the senior commanders, which is true. And this is important, what I pointed out, why the IDF allowed the October 7th attacks to happen, because they knew Netanyahu's response, which they goaded him and helped him to take part in, where it wasn't, in fact, a heavy-handed response that was on the shelf anyway, that they just dusted off to clear Gaza of militants. And so they knew he was going to, and they goaded him to do this. And so now they know there would be a blowback from liberals or proponents of a Palestinian state. So this story goes on to say, following this, Yair Netanyahu on X, what are they, the army chiefs, trying to hide? If there was no betrayal, why are they so afraid that external and independent parties will check what happened? What does she mean by what happened? Well, I told you what happened. Why there was a failure in preventing the October 7th attack, and why even the leftists in the IDF command allowed, now these people are leftists, allowed and in some cases supported Netanyahu's plan and the Hawks in the IDF's plan to clear Gaza of militants, which they knew would result in civilian casualties and that which would get condemned internationally. And you saw Benjamin Netanyahu's put up for war crimes, and one of his biggest opponents was in the IDF, one of the commanders in the IDF. So that's what they're talking about, why she's talking about a coup, because that was my belief why it was eventually set up, because they're trying to undermine all conservatives around the globe in all countries. I'm going to zip through these here. Russian Navy wargaming maritime conflict on NATO lake. The Russian Baltic Fleet has conducted exercise in the body of water dubbed the NATO lake amid heightened tensions with the alliance. So that's the Baltic Sea. In the Baltic Sea, which is south of Scandinavia, what have you. Newsweek also says Russian claims they shot down a U.S. spy drone over the Black Sea. We don't really have to go into this. It was reported in Pravda, the fact that the Americans have intelligence gathering operations all over the Black Sea and all over Ukraine. So why, and surveillance drones all over the Black Sea, and particularly around Crimea and Sevastopol, and counting the ships and watching ship movements, and fleet preparations in Sevastopol. This is not surprising, so maybe they shot down one of the drones. Maybe they didn't. Who knows? That was a little long, maybe 45 minutes. I'm not really watching the time, so. And Rumble doesn't give me a clock all the time. It should. So thanks for joining me today for the podcast. It is Wednesday. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, share the podcast, leave a comment. Remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically. We're in a sea of propaganda, social media soup, and try to know how to establish facts while looking through the media. You got to literally read between the lines to see what's said and how they bolster any claims they might make, like Trump is a liar, he's a dictator, whatever. And I'm also go live on Rumble every day at around 10 a.m. Stick around. It might be a little late sometimes. So stay hip to the trick, and I'll see you tomorrow.
They cheat. They cheat.
This is all a conspiracy. No, you know that it's a conspiracy there.
Rudy's Revelation.